Hello and welcome back to another Archaeo-Scope. Now this series is kind of like an inverted questions of doom, where rather than you sending me a question to try and answer to the best of my ability, I put a question out there for you in the form of a video. And hopefully together we go away and think about the issue at hand, we discuss with our friends, we comment below, and we come up with an answer which one of us on our own might not have considered. That's the heart of this series, and it's one which I really actually, to be honest, value and benefit from, because often I bring to you questions which I really have no firmly formed opinions yet, and today is one of those cases. I'm sat at my desk and I want to share with you footage from the teaser trailer to Battlefield 1. It's an upcoming computer game from the developers DICE, people behind the Battlefield series. Now, Battlefield is a series which is, as the name implies, all about battlefields. It's, for the most part, been a modern war computer game where people get to experience battle in the form of a sandbox. That is a giant playable map area where multiple players can get involved and the chaos of war sort of unfolds because so many people are doing their thing. They're running around being themselves, picking up weapons, getting into vehicles, shaping the conflict as it unfolds, that you get this sort of fluid sense of a battle. You get this sort of slightly chaotic sense of a battle. And so the people who like Battlefield like it for that reason. The other big franchise in terms of modern warfare computer games is Call of Duty, which you may have heard of. And Call of Duty, though, is much more narrative driven. It's much more sort of A to B. So you are still first person, sort of, from the protagonist perspective, running along, holding your guns, shooting baddies. But as you go from A to B, the narrative unfolds. So maybe a building will collapse or something will explode or something, like a key character will get killed at a key event or a key moment. And it's almost like you're reading the stories, the chapters of a storybook as you play through the experience. So it's much more, in that sense, contained and controlled. So people like Call of Duty for the story often, and also for its multiplayer, but that's another story. And in Battlefield for this sort of sense of chaotic unfolding of a battlefield experience, also on multiple levels. So, as I say, with vehicles and weapons and ground troops and so on and so forth. But with Battlefield 1, DICE are straying into a world which hasn't really been touched on, well, not in this way, for quite a long time, and that is the First World War, the Great War. And I would love to know what you think about whether or not this is appropriate. We are currently living the centenary of the First World War. We are hearing about its impact on soldiers, on the home front, on the globe. Is it appropriate to have the First World War portrayed in this way, as we're about to see in the trailer? So let's take a look. This is sort of the pre-trailer trailer. So there we have this sort of strange sort of moment where it says bring a trench club to a machine gun fight. Already I'm starting to think, is this appropriate? Is this actually appropriate? Trench clubs are improvised weapons on the Western Front. Often they're very useful when trying to take an enemy trench because guns have to be reloaded, whereas a trench club can be swung in close quarters very effectively. Can you charge a machine gun's position or a machine gunner's position with a trench club and expect to survive? Probably not. So is it appropriate to show this like this? Again, I'm not sure. Now you might be thinking, well, of course it is. It's unrealistic, and so is a computer game. That's the point of a computer game. But should this be a computer game? Let's move on. May contain content inappropriate for children. Okay, so first of all, I'm quite liking the fact that they're acknowledging straight away that there are different fields of of combat in the First World War. There wasn't just the Western Front. So here we have a Lawrence of Arabia type character riding through the desert. That's kind of good, I suppose, to acknowledge that there was different theatres of war. Here we have an interesting perspective on the battlefield in the Western Front. I suppose two things I quite like about this is you do have the countryside off to the left, and then you have the sort of the scarred battlefield in the middle there. But more to the point, we actually have this airplane perspective. This is an element of the First World War which is often forgotten. The fact that there was an aerial, especially aerial reconnaissance element. Will they overdo it though? Will they have this being used very casually as a sort of almost like a modern air force? Again, interesting question which I at this point don't have the answer to. On we go. Enemy fire! Now, it's all getting a bit Hollywood, isn't it? You have that very dramatic trench shovel smack there. You have the riding through the canyon, almost like something out of Star Wars, and then you have the guy crashing into the tower here. Yeah, I'm not necessarily against the dramatization of the First World War, but this is adding a hyper reality, a sense of the hyper real to a conflict which was very real, which didn't need any more hyper reality adding to it. Let's move on. Come on then! So here we have gas being used. That's kind of, again, it's good. It's historically appropriate to do it. This looks very dramatic. Presumably uses a gameplay element. Presumably you'll be able to call down gas strikes on your enemies, this kind of thing. But given how horrific mustard gas is and was, again, should we be doing this in a computer game? And should it be being shown like this in a computer game trailer? On we go. Move forward! Now this interests me, and that is the use of tanks. In real life, in the First World War, the Allies, we had far more tanks, in the order of thousands more tanks, compared to a handful of tanks that the Germans had. Now, presumably, or rather the Axis had. Now, presumably, for the sake of gameplay balance, they're going to have to allow both sides to have equal access to things like tanks and planes and so on and so forth. Is that appropriate? If you see what I mean, it should we not actually reflect the fact that land, ships, and tanks developed under the direction of Winston Churchill were actually something which at first didn't work very well, but also actually eventually gave the Allies much more of an advantage. Again, I'm happy to acknowledge that this is a computer game, so it needs to be balanced. But in that case, once again, do we need to make a computer game out of this? On we go. Get ready, man! Now here we have, I think, an allusion to shell shock. This chap looks a little bit pained and disturbed by what's happening around him. And this concerns me ever so slightly, because in the other Battlefield games, as far as I'm aware, please correct me if I'm wrong, there isn't any PTSD. You don't have people suffering from what was called shell shock in those games. In this game, it looks like they're hinting that shell shock may be a thing. Now, is that right? Or is it more of a gimmick? Are they making it like a First World War gimmick? Oh yeah, back then they got shell shock. You could argue that they're highlighting an important element of the First World War, people's exposure to shell shock and people's exposure to the effects of war. But why do it in this way, in this hyper real world where they've already set up this sort of Hollywood sense of explosions and now they're sort of showing us a sort of a sensitive side of shell shock. Are they not therefore slightly making a gimmick out of the First World War and its effect on people? Possibly. Let's move on. Now here, this, I'm really not sure what to make of this. This sort of implies that this sort of ominous looming presence of the dirigible, of the Zeppelin coming overhead, is something to be really terrified of. Now, in a battlefield situation, shoot it down. Simple as that. That thing will come down very, very quickly. It's a massive target. Yes, they were used for bombing civilian targets especially towards the beginning of the First World War, for example, in Britain. But you wouldn't use a dirigible, especially that big, over a battlefield and expect to have any sort of tactical advantage. Again, is this appropriate? Just because we find them impressive today, to have this sort of warm kind of sense of it, it's hyper real. It's making it into something which it wasn't. I like the use of the music Seven Nation Army. On the one hand, I think it's quite clever, the white stripes there being used. But again, is it slightly gimmickizing? Is that a word? Turning into a gimmick, the First World War. A veneer over their gameplay, their established gameplay motif. So there we go, Battlefield 1. What do you think? I really can't quite decide, because on the one hand, I am a gamer. You know, I love my computer games. I love experiencing computer games for the world which they are. I take them, that is, as they're presented. And I also actually quite like experiencing historical settings in computer games. You know, for example, the Assassin's Creed games, this kind of thing. You could argue that is it appropriate to do various elements of gameplay in those games as well. But on the other hand, something just sits very uncomfortably with me when I see this trailer unfolding. It feels like a Michael Bay type experience, and I'm not sure that should be applied to the Great War. Now, you could say, well, this has been happening with the Second World War for donkey's years, and it has. I mean, I actually have an annual called the what's it called? It's like a boys adventure book or something, which my dad owned, where they really dramatised and glorified the Second World War and Nazi killing and this kind of thing. And so in that sense, yes, this stuff has been happening for years, especially with regards to the Second World War. They've been making Second World War computer games for a long, long time. But for some reason, that sits slightly better with me, because there are gameplay elements there which are still current today. There are, for example, warfare which is based in street to street. There's the effects of bombing of houses. I don't know. That's felt a little bit more as though it was within the realm of the world that we live in today, if you see what I mean. The First World War and its effect on people, and its astonishing step change, gear change in terms of conflict, isn't a gimmick, but I don't think which should be used necessarily in computer games. It is an astonishing event in human history, and one which this possibly slightly cheapens. I don't know, maybe I'm making a false distinction there. Maybe actually we shouldn't even have Second World War games. And to be honest, I don't necessarily think that we should. I have, for example, played Second World War games where I go, I'm not sure about this. But for some reason, the First World War and this particular trailer, this portrayal of the First World War, does make me a bit uncomfortable. So, again, I'm not entirely sure what I think. What do you think? Please do comment below. I'd love to hear what you think. What do you take away from this trailer? Do you think that this isn't really an issue and this shouldn't be an issue? That actually all of this should be fine. Funnily enough, if they were showing, say, the Wars of the Roses, actually I wouldn't necessarily have much of a problem. It is a case of this is actually somewhere in that grey area. It's neither the Second World War, a fairly recent history, nor is it deep history. This is kind of on the cusp of history, and therefore that's why we feel so uncomfortable about it. These are interesting questions and issues, so please do comment below. I'd love to hear your opinions, and also I'd love to have my opinion and my thoughts challenged and changed. So, open season, folks. Please do comment. As ever, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.